The fraud triangle. The fraud triangle is comprised of three factors: pressure, opportunity, and rationalization. Typically, when you hear fraud triangle is applied by anti-fraud professionals, law enforcement, etc., in a financial fraud context. I want to bring this over to the domestic realm. So I kind of play both parts here. I'm a certified fraud examiner. I deal with some financial stuff, some corporate stuff, some business stuff. But typically, I apply my fraud expertise to domestic situations. And there's many ways to commit fraud in a domestic situation. Two that come to mind: financially would be hiding assets from during litigation. The second one that comes to mind is adultery. Adultery is fraud in marriage, as far as I'm concerned. And so I want to use the fraud triangle as a predictor for adultery. And so, what I want to talk about today as being the number one predictor that your significant other will commit adultery in the future would be their inability or ability to handle pressure, which is the first factor in the fraud triangle. And so I'm of the opinion that in order for us to fix marriages and have healthy marriages, we need to go back and understand dating. And so this has been lost. The line between dating and marriages is completely blurred. People who are dating are acting married, and then once they get in their marriages, they're doing the things that they should have been doing in dating, primarily testing their spouse. Okay? It's all backwards. The testing phase comes in the dating phase. Then, after you have that commitment and are married, you should be making life easier for the other person. You should be helping that person grow, making them better, supporting each other, and just being able to be better resilient against life together. Unfortunately, this is happening in the dating phase, but not in the marriage phase, because I think, number one, we don't know what dating is for. Number two, we are so scared to be alone, maybe. I'm not really sure, but the red flags in the dating phase are being overlooked. The testing is not going on. People are just floating around, getting emotionally attached, basing all their assessments off feelings and chemistry, which, listen, that has its place. But what you really need to be doing is your due diligence in the dating phase. And one of the biggest ways to do this is to observe how the other person reacts to pressure. Why do I say this? Because pressure causes stress. And if you want to find out something about someone, you observe how they react when they are stressed out, because that is where vices stem from. That is where escaping, if you will, escaping patterns, escaping behavior, escapology is sometimes what I call it, stems from. Because marriage is stressful, life is stressful, all these things are stressful. So if that person is demonstrating unhealthy reactions to stress, maybe they have a bad day at work and they go out and get hammered at the bar afterwards. That's a vice. That could develop into a vice if it's a pattern. That's not a healthy way to deal and manage the stress. Maybe and it's not so much different than affairs, right? So pleasure seeking behavior, why people seek pleasure, it's because it's an escape from reality. And so if they're escaping and they're not dealing with their problems in an effective, productive way, or they are easily rattled and easily frazzled, and every little thing offends them, and they curl up in a ball and cry in their room, or whatever. You need to understand intimately what you're dealing with. And the only way to do that is to see how they react under stress. And I see women doing this a lot. Their boyfriend will be stressed out or whatever, and they'll try to run in and save them. Do not do that. You need to be in the dating phase. You need to act as an observer. Don't try to make everything better. You need to look at it clearly and objectively. You need to understand. I mean, write it down if you need to. On this day, this stressed this person out. And you need to look at it like very objectively. So, what was the outside pressure that caused the stress? And was the reaction to the stress a legitimate, was it proportional to the outside factor? Okay, so somebody maybe at work said something to them early in the morning that made them mad. Were they stressed out about that for a week? Because that's not proportional to the event. So the reaction has to be proportional to the event. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what is the reaction? Do they go to the gym and work it out that way? Do they buckle down? Maybe they have work stress, so they start a side project to open their own business so they don't have to deal with their horrible boss or their horrible fellow employees, coworkers, right? There's different ways to deal with stress. How are they looking at it? Are they solutions oriented or are they problem oriented? And the biggest factor for if somebody's going to commit adultery in this topic of pressure is, are they a person who deals with stress by escapology, escaping, whether that's through substances, whether that's through physically escaping? Maybe they go for a drive across the country weirdly or something like that. But a lot of times, pleasure seeking behaviors such as sex, are they looking to have sex with you every time they're stressed out? That's a big indicator, because that's going to show that the way their brain works, they prioritize that 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes of pleasure when they're stressed out. So later on down the road, if something happens where you're not able to provide that for them, maybe you're pregnant, maybe you're sick, whatever the situation is, are they going to go out and seek that somewhere else? Now, I would say for men, it's usually they escape through sex, through physical pleasure. For women, it's a little different. Women typically try to escape through emotional validation, um, emotional relationships rather than physical relationships. And so if you're a man, you need to look at that. When something happens in her life and she's stressed out, does she become more emotionally clingy to you or to anybody else in her life? Does she prioritize talking it out, or um, throw herself further into your relationship? Because that's going to be a big indicator. Because if something happens down the road in your marriage, and listen, most of the time you guys are going to stress each other out in marriage, right? And so, or life is just going to be stressing both of you out. So you're both going to have the same problem because now you're a unit, and um, you're going to be stressed out about it. You're stressed out about the same thing. So what are you doing? Is the man running off looking for pleasure? Or even if the opportunity is present, taking that when at another time maybe they wouldn't have taken it? And is the woman being tempted out of the marriage by some emotional validation? And these are very important things to discover prior to the commitment. So my advice for anybody that's dating, and seriously dating, not just in some sort of long-term weird thing, somebody who's seriously considering a long-term commitment in the form of marriage and is actively, trying to sort that out in the dating world, would be to look at how the other person reacts to pressure. And I'm going to tell you something. In 2025, our coping mechanisms are crap. There's substance abuse is off the chart, adultery is off the chart, half of marriages end in divorce, da 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 da. Most people do not have the emotional resiliency to react to pressure in productive ways, because that's harder than reacting to the pressure by a substance abuse issue or pleasure seeking behavior or whatever. And I personally believe this is part of the breakdown of society. This was done on purpose. A lot of things have been pushed by agendas that are well funded and with the end goal in mind of the breakdown of the family. Because if you don't have emotional resiliency and you don't react well under pressure, and also I will say because of the general comfort that we live in, people are just soft. But if you don't have any kinds of, you've never been tested, you're going to go and you're going to get in a marriage and you're going to break down real quick, real quick. You're going to go and mess up your marriage. So you really need to be testing that other person. And sometimes you don't have to actively test them. You sit back and observe, because life has a way of testing people. You observe how they react. You ask them about their history. Do they have any prior events in their life that would demonstrate a level of emotional resiliency. The military, for example, is a good one. I love entrepreneurs, right? Business people deal with, and I'm not really talking like self-employed people, no offense, but like if you work for yourself, it's not the same level as actually having employees and making sure people are being paid so they could eat. Um, how long have they been in business, these sort of things. So I love business owners because they are used to high stress. So it's very easy for me to look at a business owner, watch their behavior, and figure out what their coping mechanisms are for pressure, for dealing with stress and pressure, because the pressure is constantly on a business owner, right? And so if I meet a business owner and I already know what level I'm walking into of pressure that they're used to. And so I just observe their behaviors. Do they smoke a lot of pot? Do they drink? Are they promiscuous? Those are going to be all things I'm looking at, because that's what's going to translate over into the marriage. That behavior is not just going to stop because you're married. That is deeply rooted coping mechanisms. That's deeply rooted in who they are. And I'm not saying people can't change, they can, but they would need to do a lot of work in order to be able to change that, maybe through therapy or just some self-discovery or some religion, whatever the avenue is. They would need to be able to change that. And so before you were going to commit, you would have to see that that behavior has changed. So that's my advice. Sorry, a little rambly, but number one predictor of if somebody is going to have an adulterous affair is their inability or ability to handle pressure and what their coping mechanisms look like.